maybe the deepest area of conflict between science and religion, although I don't think it gets mentioned so often, and that is in the method of approach to truth. Religion largely relies on authority. It may be the authority of sacred texts, as in Sunni Islam and Protestant Christianity, or texts together with religious leaders who are divinely inspired to interpret them, like Shiite Islam and Roman Catholicism. We don't have anything like that in the world of science. And I want to make a clear distinction. We do have heroes. As scientists, we have enormous respect for. But they're not authorities to whom we go for solution of scientific problems. For example, in my field, certainly Einstein is the greatest hero of the 20th century. But no one today arguing about the theory of gravitation would settle the issue by referring back to Einstein's papers of 1915, 1916. Today, it's understood that any reasonably good graduate student understands general relativity better than Einstein did. We have learned, we have progressed, and so in science we don't have prophets. We have heroes, but not prophets.
If you're afraid of death, for example, you might superficially think that a priest who tells you that you're not really going to die would be more comforting than a scientist who tells you it is highly implausible that our individuality could survive the decay of our brains. But I have heard experienced nurses who've worked all their lives in old people's homes say that the ones who are most terrified of death tend to be the Roman Catholics. All that guilt fed from the cradle up and the terror of purgatory and hell. As for eternal nothingness, is it really all that frightening? As Mark Twain said, I do not fear death. I'd been dead for billions and billions of years before I was born and had not suffered the slightest inconvenience from it. In any case, I don't think I've ever met anyone at a funeral who dissents from the view, my view, that the non-religious parts, the eulogies, the deceased's favourite poems or music, those non-religious parts are always more moving than the prayers. I want to end by reading the opening lines of a previous book of mine, Unweaving the Rainbow. These are lines that I've long earmarked for my own funeral. We are going to die, and that makes us the lucky ones. Most people are never going to die because they're never going to be born. The potential people who could have been here in my place, but who will in fact never see the light of day, outnumber the sand grains of Sahara. Certainly those unborn ghosts include greater poets than Keats, scientists greater than Newton. We know this because the set of possible people allowed by our DNA so massively outnumbers the set of actual people. In the teeth of these stupefying odds, it is you and I, in our ordinariness, that are here. We privileged few who won the lottery of birth against all odds, how dare we whine at our inevitable return to that prior state from which the vast majority have never stirred? Thank you very much.
That is really the glory of science, that science is tentative, that it is not certain, that it is subject to change. What is really, in my way of thinking, disgraceful is to have a set of beliefs that you think is absolute and has been so from the start and can't change, where you simply won't listen to evidence. You say, if the evidence agrees with me, it's not necessary. If it doesn't agree with me, it's false. This is the legendary remark of Omar when they captured Alexandria and asked what to do with the library. He said, if the books agree with the Koran, they are not necessary and may be burned. If they disagree with the Koran, they are pernicious and must be burned. Well, there are still these Omar-like thinkers who think that all of knowledge will fit into one book called the Bible, and refuse to allow that there is even the conceivability of an error there. That, to my way of thinking, is much more dangerous than a system of knowledge which is tentative and uncertain.
But again, not really a college, because Liberty teaches creation science. In fact, they have an actual center for creation studies, complete with some bones and a guy with a lab coat. Suck on that, Smithsonian Institute. And they teach that the Earth is 5,000 years old and dinosaur fossils washed up in Noah's flood. This is a school you flunk out of when you get the answers right. I would say we should take away their accreditation, but it's a private college and they can teach whatever they want. But at the very least, diplomas from Liberty should come with a huge asterisk next to your name. And at the bottom it should say, "This institution teaches superstitious nonsense. Hire at your own risk." Conservatives often say that gay marriage cheapens their marriage. Well, I think a diploma from Liberty cheapens my degree from a real school. I worked really hard for 4 years and sold a lot of drugs to get that thing. So if you want to go to some place that teaches the Bible is literally true and the earth was created last Tuesday when God got into gardening, that's fine, but you can't call it a university. Target serves pizza. It doesn't make it a restaurant. It's just wrong for Liberty to hand out diplomas that look just like real diplomas from actual schools that teach facts. Look, this is the Liberty University diploma, see? There's no gold stars or smiley faces or Care Bears. It looks real. But here's the problem with confusing a church with a school. It mixes up the things you believe, religion, with the things we know, education. Then you start... Mitt Romney recently told the crowd, "I happen to believe that the Constitution was not just brilliant, but probably inspired." And everyone applauded because they'd all seen this painting, James McNaughton's One Nation Under God, which reinforces the now mandatory Republican talking point that the Constitution isn't the work of brilliant but imperfect statesmen, but a divinely inspired blueprint conceived by God himself and hand-delivered by his only begotten son, Kenny Loggins. Sorry, but our Constitution wasn't divinely inspired. It's just that the guys who wrote it were smart because they went to real colleges. Thomas Jefferson went to William and Mary. Madison went to Princeton. Alexander Hamilton went to Columbia. And those schools should not be put in the same category as Oral Roberts or Bob Jones or the Dueling Banjos College of Praying and Preaching. Or Liberty, which not only shouldn't be called a university, it shouldn't be called Liberty, since it strictly forbids kissing or drinking. And if you're in college and you can't kiss or drink, good luck fucking.
I would say the greatest misconception about atheism is that we're not nice people. I think that a lot of people think that morality comes from religion. Religion teaches that morality comes from religion, and therefore if you don't have religion, you don't have morality. So I think the greatest misconception of atheism is that we're not nice and or immoral, which of course cannot be the case. It cannot be the case because all the data combats that. The population of people who are non-religious in this country, depending on your polls, goes somewhere between 15 and 30%. The population of atheists or non-religious people in federal prisons is 0.07%. 0.07 of 1%. So the amount of people, the amount of atheists who are committing crimes is tiny compared to the amount of atheists out there. On the other hand, if you look at it from a morality perspective, from an outside perspective, you can see what's happening. People change churches for a reason. They change churches because they don't agree with the church they're in. If they don't agree with the church they're in, so they say, okay, well, this church isn't doing something, it's not striking my moral fancy. I'm going to go to this church over here because it does. Well, that means morality is independent of religion. And then what they do is they go to this church over here that says, okay, your morality is correct, and God says so. And then they say, God gives me my morality, right? And it's kind of backwards, but that's how it works. The reality is that every single human picks their own morality. Morality is relative. And everybody picks it. Everybody chooses it. The only difference between an atheist and a theist is that an atheist will internalize it and say, this is my morality. And a theist will say, this is my morality because I get it from my religion.
It is almost too ridiculous to mention it, but I'm afraid I have to because of the more than 40% of the American population who, as I lamented in Chapter 1, accept the Bible literally. Think what the geographical distribution of animals should look like if they'd all dispersed from Noah's Ark. Shouldn't there be some sort of law of decreasing species diversity as we move away from an epicenter, perhaps Mount Ararat? I don't need to tell you that is not what we see. Why would all those marsupials, ranging from tiny pouched mice through koalas and bilbies to giant kangaroos and diprotodonts, why would all those marsupials, but no placentals at all, have migrated en masse from Mount Ararat to Australia? Which route did they take? And why did not a single member of their straggling caravan pause on the way and settle in India, perhaps, or China, or some haven along the Great Silk Road? Why did the entire order Edentata, all 20 species of armadillo, including the extinct giant armadillo, all 6 species of sloth, including extinct giant sloths, and all 4 species of anteater, troop off unerringly for South America, leaving not a rack behind, leaving no hide nor hair nor armor plate of settlers somewhere along the way? Why did all the penguins undertake the long waddle south to the Antarctic, not a single one to the equally hospitable Arctic? Once again, I'm sorry to take a sledgehammer to so small and fragile a nut, but I have to do so. I have to do so because more than 40% of the American people believe literally in the story of Noah's Ark. We should be able to ignore them and get on with our science, but we can't afford to because they control school boards. They homeschool their children to deprive them of access to proper science teachers. And they include many members of the United States Congress, some state governors, and even presidential and vice presidential candidates. They have the money and the power to build institutions, universities, even a museum where children ride life-size mechanical models of dinosaurs with saddles, which they're solemnly told coexisted with humans.
Very glad that it seems that Jews have a gene for atheism. The great Jewish contribution has always been to humanism and to human solidarity, and it is that, and not the wailings and bleatings to an empty sky.
Gentlemen, can we
that
talk
distinguish
about
it. Now, yes.
Can we talk about God,
to the topic.
please?
Well,
To
the question of I'm
When
sorry,
you
I could
use
hardly let such a challenge go in all decency. Now,
When
to
you use the
I can
word
do the
God-
rest very quickly. It's called the ontological argument. It says that if you can name the idea of a God, surely there must be something existent or real, at any rate, that you are talking about. It's not the teapot that Bertrand Russell postulates orbiting the sun. To talk about it is to postulate it. Well, this, of course, is a piece of circular reasoning, but I hope I helped to clarify it in my opening statement by saying there's every difference between being a deist and a theist. Science and reason cannot disprove the existence of a first cause or a creator. They cannot do that. We can only say that everything works without that assumption, and there is no evidence on the other side of the case. This seems to us to license unbelief. To the theistic argument of a God who actually is interested in answering prayers, cares who you marry, who you go to bed with, what you eat, which side wins in a war, and so forth, we say this is human propaganda, self-evidently man-made, and the so-called miraculous evidence for it has been repeatedly and conclusively falsified and disproved.